Everyone can hear me? You can give me a nod or a thumbs up. It's so nice to meet you all. I wish I could meet each of you in person, but of course, like the magic of Zoom is that Shirel can be in Israel and I can be in New York, and many of you are in California and all over the world. So it's a blessing that we can come together in all these different times and learn together. I'm Rabbi Avi Killip, as she said, Executive Vice President at Hadar, and would love to always talk more about Hadar. If anyone's interested, you could reach out to me at some point later. But today what we're going to do, and I should just also say, I've heard so much about CSP as an amazing learning community. It's just an honor to actually sort of get to be here and learn with you all. We're going to learn over this 3-part series, 3 different midrashim from the same collection and actually from the same author. They are a collection called Dirshuni, which is edited by Tamar Biala, and she's also the author of the Midrash we will look at today. So I just wanted to show you, I have like the show and tell here. These are the Dirshuni books. There's 2 volumes in Hebrew, and there is a forthcoming English translation, which every time I've ever taught this class, I've had to say, it's not in English, I'm so sorry. But now actually this coming spring, Brandeis University Press is publishing an English translation with selections of the first 2 books. So that is really, really amazing. So I'll share a little bit about what we're going to be learning. Today, we're going to focus on one midrash. It's a midrash about the death of Miriam, the story of the death of Miriam. And as much as, saying something is your favorite text to teach is like, which child is your favorite child is the child that's in front of you. But it really is true to say that this is my favorite. This is my favorite. You should come to the other 2 classes also, but this is really one of my favorite texts to teach because I just experience it as such a gift. And it's a pleasure and an honor to get to share the gift of this midrash with you. So what is Dirshuni? Dirshuni is modern Israeli women's midrash. And I like to say it's actually a new genre. It's not exactly like studying classical ancient rabbinic midrash. It is like a combination of classical midrash, like 1 part poetry, 1 part short story, and frequently also 1 part social commentary. That the midrashim are written by modern Israeli women because they have something to say about what's going on in the world today. And in particular, this is true of Tamar's midrashim. They like classical midrash, which brings together different elements of the story from the Bible, how we see them in the Tanakh, in the Bible. Modern midrash, and in particular Tamar's midrashim, and the one we'll look at today, bring together, like classical midrash, they're bringing together verses from the Bible and images from the Bible, and they're also bringing together images from classical midrash, because we now have the benefit of having read all of those ancient midrashim, and also playing sometimes on modern Hebrew words. And as I said, sometimes even referencing modern events and things that happened today. So all of this comes together in these midrashim. And I'll just tell a brief story of how it came to be, because I think it's powerful to hear. Is that Tamar Biala, she is a person who started writing midrash herself as her own personal writing exercise. And at some point she thought to herself, I wonder if there are any other women out there in Israel writing midrash. Like, I can't be the only woman who's taken up this practice of writing midrash. And this story takes place, right? She started this project. There's now 3 books in the works. Right before you would have done this on the internet, she actually took out an ad in a newspaper with one other friend and said, like, if we want to publish a volume of women's midrash, like, is any women out there in Israel writing midrash? And they got over 1,000 submissions that they were blown away. Wow, this is actually something that is happening in Israel, that women are writing midrash. And they edited these midrashim into the book Dirshuni. And the last thing I'll say about Tamar as a teacher is that she's the author of the midrash we're going to read today, is that the first time I heard Tamar teach, I was first introduced to her midrashim through hearing her teach them. She cried. She cried while she was teaching. And it totally opened up for me what is possible as a teacher. What does it mean to bring so much vulnerability and so much of yourself to your teaching that you cry in your teaching? And I'll say I've heard her teach many midrashim many times since, and she's cried on multiple occasions since. That's the intensity and the power that she brings to her her teaching. And you'll see that come through, I think, in this Midrash. When we get to the end, you'll remember back to that fact and you'll say, yeah, that makes sense. You can sort of feel her connection and her depth and her tears through her teaching. Okay, so now we'll start to talk about the Midrash itself. There's a lot we need to know to study this particular Midrash. So again, the heading is the death of Miriam. But we are going to draw on many different images, a lot of the story of Miriam. So anything you know about the story of Miriam, start calling it up, because I'm gonna invite you to share it at some point. But actually, in order to understand this modern Midrash, there are two classical Midrashim, two ancient Midrashim that are gonna need to be in the background of your mind. The first Midrash I'm just gonna tell you about, and the second one we'll actually look at inside and read together. The first one is a text from Hulin. It's a text from the Talmud. And it's a Midrash that we're not going to study it. I'm just going to give you a 2-line summary. If you know it, great. You'll bring that knowledge into this room, so to speak, into the Zoom. And if you don't know it, you can study it at another time. So I'll give you my giveaway, which is that I've actually hidden this Midrash at the bottom of your handout, but I don't want you to go read it right now. That's a take-home gift for you after we finish studying this class. If you want to go back and dive deeper into this Midrash, it's hiding for you at the bottom of the handout. But for right now, I'm just going to summarize it. This is a Midrash about the sun and the moon. God makes the sun and the moon, and the moon challenges God and says, Master of the universe, how can two kings share one crown? In other words, hey, how are we supposed to share the sky, right? God sets up the sky with these even lights, and the moon doesn't understand how to share and asks this question. And God responds by punishing the moon for the question. God says to the moon, go and diminish yourself. That's a quote that we're going to see appear in our modern Midrash. God makes the moon smaller. So in essence, this is a story that's going to, it's in the vein of the kind of myth where you say, how did the world come to be the way it is? How did the universe, I suppose, come to be the way it is? And the moon is smaller because it was a punishment from God for having asked to be bigger, potentially. And then this Midrash is actually, within the Midrash, they sort of analogize the sun and the moon onto man and woman. Why are women smaller? God makes the moon smaller. There's an analogy between women and the moon here. And then throughout the Midrash, God tries to make it right to the moon. Oh, actually, it's good to be small. Look at all these great people who are small. It's a very long Midrash. You can dive into it. The important thing to know is that at the end, actually, God sort of admits that God was wrong to have diminished the moon. And the Midrash ends with God needing to atone for God's mistake. God should never have diminished the moon. That was unreasonable. And God actually apologizes for that mistake. So that's one Midrash we're going to have in our minds. And again, if you know it, great. And if you don't, that's all you really need to know. The sun and the moon gets diminished. God ends up having to sort of apologize and make it right. Okay, that's Midrash number 1. Midrash number 2, I'm going to invite Shirel to share the handout for us. Midrash number 2 is actually found in the Midrash number 2 is actually found in the book itself. So the way that Tamar publishes her modern Midrash is that she includes this ancient Midrash beforehand. So this ancient Midrash comes from Shir HaShirim Rabbah. Shir HaShirim Rabbah is the Midrashic text that analyzes the Song of Songs. So the Song of Songs as a text, as a book of the Bible, right, is this like very sexy love song between two lovers who are playing with each other and writing to each other. And sort of the task, the approach of Shir HaShirim Rabbah as a Midrashic text is to say, oh, that very sexy love poem, it's actually about the relationship between the two lovers in that story are actually God and the Jewish people. So for each line, the way this classical Midrash works, Shir HaShirim Rabbah, for each sentence, it's going to take sort of the love poetry and tell you how it's really about God and the Jewish people. That's the approach here. Okay, so we're going to read together. I think I'll read this one, but I may invite someone else to unmute and read the next one out loud. So you can think about whether you want to be a reader, but I'll read us through this one. Okay, so Shir HaShirim Rabbah, we start. Oh, let him kiss me with the kisses of your mouth. That's the quote from the Song of Songs, right? Very, very provocative image. Let him kiss me with the kisses of your mouth. And the text is going to tell us what is this really about? The Holy Blessed One said their desire for kisses is for me. And the rabbis say, okay, so that we already have brought it in. Actually, God says, who's being spoken to when you say, let him kiss me? The him here is God. You should be desiring a kiss from God. And what does it mean to want a kiss from God? What is a kiss from God? So the text says, these one's souls will be taken with a kiss. We're going to hear about 3 people who died from a kiss from God. Okay, so one question that I want you to hold as we read through these texts, both this one and the next one, is what does it look like to die from a kiss from God? Okay, if we had like longer time, I would take a bunch of answers to this from the group. What do you imagine? What's the image that conjures up if all I say to you is died from a kiss from God? So the first person who dies from a kiss from God is Aaron. Rabbi Azariah said, we found that Aaron's soul was taken by none other than a kiss, as is written, and Aaron the priest went up on the hill's hill at God's word and died there. So this is a quote from Numbers. And there's 2 things that the Midrash is picking up on. At God's word is literally al pi Hashem, at God's mouth. So we're saying he died at God's mouth. That's where we're reading in the kiss. And then it says he died there, Sham. Now we're going to see the next one. And from where do we know as regards Moses' soul? How do we know Moses also died from a kiss from God? As it is said, and there died Moses. We have the Sham again in Hebrew. The servant of God at God's word. Again, we have al pi Hashem, at the mouth of God, right? It's this kiss imagery of the mouth. And now we're going to throw in a third one. We're going to say, and where do we know as regards Miriam? How do we know that Miriam also died at a kiss from God? Since it is written, and Miriam died there, we have the word Sham again. But in the case of the quote about Miriam, we don't have al pi Hashem, right? The more logical, how do we know it was a kiss from God, is because it said at God's mouth. And this is where the rabbis are going to call on the Midrash. They're going to use a classical Midrashic interpretive tool that if you know the phrase is called a Gezerah Shava, where you say, if you see a word here and you see a word here, you can plug some information from one place to the other place. They say, if Aaron and Moses both died at God's mouth there, then it's also true that when we just see the word there with Miriam, just as there later on with Aaron and Moses is by God's mouth, so too here, it's also God's mouth. So then they have an implicit question. Well, if Miriam died from a kiss from God, why doesn't it say so? Why doesn't it say al pi Hashem like in the other places? And the Midrash ends with this amazing and ridiculous and infuriating and awesome answer. It would be indecent to spell it out. So what does that mean, right? The premise here, I think, is that God is male, and it would be inappropriate to write in the Torah about a male God kissing a female Miriam. It's sort of a strange concept to be given because, okay, but the male God kissing the men seems fine. Is this a sexual kiss in the first place? A kiss from death as a sexual kiss seems confusing, but also we're in Shir HaShirim. So we started with the premise of sort of of a romantic kiss. But what this Midrash is leaving us with is an image. When we say, how did Miriam die? What did that look like? The answer is she died from a kiss from God. So I just want to start by inviting, and I'm just going to do it in the chat to make it a little bit easier and make sure that we time ourselves well, to just invite you to put into the chat, when I say a death from the kiss of a kiss from God, what words, give me a feeling or an image or a tone that conjures up for you. We'll sort of just take a minute to let everybody write something in the chat. Comfort, peaceful. Yeah, an easy death, a painless death. With a smile on your lips is a great image we're going to come back to. Something gentle. There's something sweet about it, right? I always feel like if you're a Harry Potter reader and you have this other image of a kiss from a Dementor, it's this is the opposite of that, right? This is the most gentle, right? Maybe there's something of Hashem breathed life into you, and maybe Hashem is breathing the breath back out of you, tenderness. So this is, I'll share, I taught this class once in person at a Shavuot retreat, and it was late in the evening actually when I taught the class, and a woman came to me at the end of the class, and she said to me, an older woman, and she said to me, my husband died 2 years ago, and he died from a kiss from God. I know it. Like, I was in the room and I felt it and I experienced it. It was like such a powerful moment for me to remember how texts are so real, right? That for her, she read this and she said, like, yes, I know this experience. Actually, I could tell you what it's like to die from a kiss from God. That was my experience of when my husband died. Okay, so now we're going to take time to actually see how we're going to look at Tamar's Midrash to see how does she understand and fill out this image for us of Miriam dying with a kiss. The one thing we're going to do first is the one last thing, and then I promise we're going to read the Midrash, is we're going to conjure up everything we know about Miriam. So again, I'm going to ask you to put into the chat, and I'm going to open up mine so I can look at it. Any facts we know from the Torah about Miriam. What do we know about her life that we should bring into the room? Okay, great. So Nancy's starting us off with some great answers. She was a prophet. She was Moses's older sister. Those are important. She's associated with a well, right? There's this image that Miriam is the reason there's water in the desert, right? Some people put on their Seder plate a kos Miriam, a cup of Miriam. And the connection between Miriam and the well is that when Miriam dies, the very next sentence says, and they couldn't find water. And from that, the rabbis interpret that there's this well that follows along in the desert that is like at Miriam's merit. And when Miriam dies, the well disappears, right? So she's associated with this well. Great, I'm trying to look here. There's so much good stuff here. So take the time if you want to read through the timbrels, right? Miriam crosses in crossing the Red Sea, she leads the women in dancing and singing. So much good stuff to know about Miriam. Miriam is a character who helps Moses survive, right? She puts him in the basket. She sort of watches from the reeds and makes sure he gets across. There's a classical midrash that tells us that when Miriam's parents wanted to stop having sex because they said, we don't want to have a baby boy and throw him in the river. And Miriam is the one who convinces them that they should continue having babies by saying, like, Pharaoh only wants the baby boys, but you're going to prevent also the girls, and gets them to actually to have this baby. So without Miriam, we have no redemption, right? She's pro baby, and she's also really taking care of Moshe. Okay, the one other thing we really need to know about Miriam is that she gets leprosy, right? Leprosy is mitzorah. There's some different ways you want to translate it. Leprosy is a skin disease, and she gets this skin disease as a punishment. And there are a lot of different ways to read what she's being punished for, but the punishment is definitely coming directly from God. And that's going to be the linchpin of where our Midrash is going to start. So if you'll scroll down for us here, we will, you can go all the way down so that we'll start with the Midrash. And now we are going to get to actually dive into our story. And I think it might be nice to have another reader just to break up my voice. If you want to, like, raise your electronic hand, if you are interested in being the sort of out loud reader, and just know that I'm going to interrupt you basically nonstop throughout your reading. That if you're a person who likes to read out loud, you could raise your hand. We'll see if we have any volunteers. Do they have the ability to raise their hands? I think so. All right. Let's have Sarah. I think you're the first one. If you want to, Shirel, I think you have to unmute Sarah so she can read for us.
Okay. Am I unmuted now? I should be.
Great. Okay. So you'll read for us nice and loud, and just know that I'm going to keep interrupting you. Actually going to tell you right from the start to just give us line number 1, and then I'm going to talk a little bit.
Okay. From the day that Miriam returned to the encampment, God's statement about her, would she not be disgraced, was fulfilled. And she hid in the tent and no longer revealed herself to the children of Israel.
All right. So like classical Midrash, Tamar packs so much into every single sentence, right? There's so much set up here in this first sentence. And I'm glad you realized to read in English. I just will say, like, if you're a Hebrew reader, actually, you can try to follow along in the Hebrew. It's not a particularly hard Hebrew, but we, for the sake of this class, are gonna work from the English side, and I'll point out some Hebrew words as they are helpful. So from the day that Miriam returned to the encampment, already we can tell where we're situating in the story, right? We are after Miriam. Miriam gets sick with leprosy. She's sick for a week. The people actually wait for her. She then comes back in to the camp, and then they continue on. So this story, we're taking place, obviously we're going to have her death, so we know we're later on, but we're some time after her returning to the camp, so much so that we're ready to say, like, from the day that she returned to the camp, it's already been a while. So God's statement, and here we have the quote actually from the story in the Torah, would she not be disgraced? This is the line that God says when God gives her leprosy, was fulfilled. So we have this image of like, what, if we're asking the question, what impact did this leprosy have on Miriam's life? The answer is it had a really severe impact, right? It was fulfilled. She was disgraced. And from now on, like, it's the turning point in the story. Tamar tells us that she, at that point, never comes out of her tent again. She does not interact with anyone ever again. She sort of goes into quarantine and she stays in quarantine. Okay, so the next sentence is going to give us like just as much to talk about. So take us to the end of the paragraph.
I'd love to, but I'm only seeing the Hebrew on my screen at the moment.
Oh, can you, I see all of it. So I think maybe if you use the little thing in the middle of your screen to expand it.
Well, if I expand it, I get even less.
Okay, so we go to a different reader?
I think so.
All right. Did I have one other volunteer? Sharon, are you? I can't tell if you're actually there, but did you want to read?
I'm here. I'm ready to read.
Okay, great. You want to pick up from Like the Moon? Thank you, Sarah.
Like the moon, which too sought to reign as an equal and was told, go and diminish yourself. She would emerge only at the time when darkness would descend and hurry to that well which the Holy Blessed One had left them, which tumbled along with them on their journeys.
Okay, so many different images are brought in here, right? She never comes out, except that she does come out. She comes out only at night, like the moon, right? This is the image back to that first Midrash that I was telling you about. That moon sought to reign as equal, and God told the moon, go and diminish yourself. I've never heard anyone put that Midrash in concert with the story of Miriam and Moshe. If you actually read the verses, what Miriam says to God right before she gets this punishment is like, hey, am I not also a prophet? Don't you talk to me too? She seems to be saying about Moses, like, Moses isn't the only leader, I'm also the leader. And then she gets punished. It's actually an amazing parallel read of that classical Midrash about the moon being told, go diminish yourself, and then Miriam being told, would she not be disgraced, sort of gone and put in her place. And here, there you go. And here she is, oh no, we lost our handout, Shira.
One moment, sorry for that.
I'm gonna keep talking while you.
Okay, you keep talking. I'll do the share once again. Give me a moment.
So here, not only is she like the moon in that she had this experience, but Tamar really like plays that out, right? She's going to be like the moon in that she's only going to leave her house at night. She's only going to come out at night. And when she comes out at night, where's she going to go? She's going to go to this other place that we have in association with Miriam, which is she's going to go to the well. When she comes out at night, she only comes out at night. And when she comes out at night, she goes to the well. All right, let's get our text back. We'll scroll down and we'll see what's going to happen. You can scroll, yeah, right here.
Miriam sat alone?
Yep.
No?
Scroll up a tiny bit and then we're good.
Miriam sat alone as the people were scared of her leprosy lest it return, and she herself waited for that leprosy to come and destroy her face and take her soul.
Okay, so this whole line is just telling us how sort of devastating the situation is. The Hebrew is Yashva Miriam Badad, which with the translation says she sat alone. Badad is like, it also has like, it could say she lonely, right? Not just alone, but lonely. It has an echo here of Echa Yashva Badad, which is the beginning line of the book of Lamentations, which is like, Lamentations is the story about the city in the worst of the worst, as a widow, completely devastated, is like that. The Hebrew is calling on that image for us in our minds, that she is really alone in this sort of extreme way. And there's some combination here, right, that Tamar is giving us. It's some combination of like her own self-imposed quarantine, and that the people are actually scared of her. She's worried her leprosy will come back, and the people are also worried that her leprosy will come back. Yeah, let's do one more section.
And what would she do every night at the time that she would come to the well? She would lean down to those very same waters to see if the delicate splendor of her face had dimmed. She wanted to know if the skin on it had been devoured and her eyes sunk again into their graves. When at that time she would see that the light still flowed from her countenance, that she had asked for forgiveness and been forgiven, she wept for her face, which nobody any longer ever saw or kissed, not her beloved, not her brothers, not her friends.
All right. It's pretty intense. Let's start with what's actually happening. She's going to the well here, not to drink, but to use the water as a mirror, right? This is an ancient story. She doesn't have a mirror, and she is living her days in constant fear that this skin disorder has come back to her face. And when she goes to the well, she's able to like look into the water and see her reflection. And only in that moment when she sees her reflection, does she realize, no, she is not actually sick. And yeah, someone says Moses prayed for her healing, right? She's actually healed, but she can't really accept that fact. And only when she sees that she's healed, that she's not sick, does she then realize sort of like how sad this is and how lonely she is, and she cries. And she cries for the fact that she's not being kissed, right? So we're setting up for the fact that she is going to get this death kiss from God. But this is sort of the foreshadowing there. And I think this is a text that really feels different to me. It feels different to me even now than it did like teaching this text, in 2020, when there were just so many people who were really in quarantine and really alone, and sometimes not even sick, right? They were alone and in quarantine and not being kissed or held or touched because of a fear of illness, which is maybe this like very distinct and specific experience, not being alone because you're sick, but being alone because you're afraid of getting sick or getting other people sick, that comes through in this Midrash so powerfully that I just think it's worth noting, what is that image and how do we understand it and what do we make of it? Okay, let's keep scrolling. So when she comes to the well, she looks at her face and she starts crying. Okay, so here's what happens one night.
One night at the time she usually went to the well to check her speculum, the moon that hung above her appeared to her in the water. Her tears dripped into that well, and the reflections of her face and of the moon mixed one with the other.
All right, so I'm going to pause you again. This is, it's just so visually striking, right? She already set up a Midrash where Miriam she's compared to the moon in the reference to that story. She is like the moon in that she is only coming out at night. And here, like we actually mix her with the moon in a visual sense. So just to get an understanding, she's standing over the well, right? She's looking in. When she looks into the well, she sees her own reflection and the reflection of the moon, which is shining down from the sky above her. And then if you can picture water, when you drop a drop into the water and it sort of muddles the scene, is that the moon is here, her face is here. And when her tears fall in, they have the effect of actually like meshing the picture such that they become one image. It's like such a striking visual image where they actually literally merge into each other. And it's so interesting to have such a visual image, right, in a written text here that we can see it happening. So here she really becomes one with the moon. So tell us what happens as she cries.
As she cried, the water began to recede. She wanted to know what they were up to, and she doubled over the mouth of the well, and her heart sank as her image was no longer visible in the water. She strained her eyes into the waters, and the moon rose in them again in all her fullness. The moon trembled in the waters, and her visage hilled and revealed itself and seemed like that of her mother, Yocheved. Miriam's heart rose up.
I'm going to pause you again. You're an incredible reader. I'm so glad that you volunteered. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So she's sort of like leaning in and out, and you can picture it, right? That she's seeing the reflection, and then the reflection disappears and she sees it again. And as this happens, she catches herself for the first time, and she sees her, she's looking at herself, right? Her own reflection, but she sees her mother. So I think many people who have grown older from children into adults, right, have had this experience, right? You glance into a mirror at some moment and you see your mother or your father, right? You just see that, image and you're like, oh my God, are they here? And you have to imagine that that's even more extreme in the ancient world where you don't have mirrors all the time. You really see yourself very rarely in the ancient world, but you see your parents. So when you catch that vision of yourself, is that what you see? It actually is an echo from a Midrash about Joseph, that talks about Joseph, who was resisting the temptation of Potiphar's wife, if that's a story you know. And the Midrash says, like, how did he have the presence to resist Potiphar's wife? That would have been so hard. And the Midrash says, well, he had never seen a mirror before, Joseph, right, who lived in Israel and then in jail. He gets into this fancy Egyptian house. He sees the mirror for the first time, and in that moment, and he thinks, oh my God, Dad, you're here to haunt me and tell me not to do this action. So he sees himself and he sees Jacob, right? He sees his father. That's sort of a similar image that she's playing with here. Again, I promise I don't teach about Harry Potter in all my classes. For some reason, just this one, it always conjures up the image for me of like Harry Potter sees himself, casting a Patronus, and he says, oh, it's my dad. But it's like that image that I think is very familiar to us, where you look in and you see not yourself, or you're looking at your reflection, but you see your mother. So now she's looking at water, she's looking at her mother, she's looking at the moon, and she's looking at herself, all sort of together. And now we're going to see, we have built up this many layered image. We're going to see finally the kiss. What is Tamar offering us as the kiss? And I would tell you, the way I read this Midrash, Tamar gives us sort of three different images of what the kiss is and what it looks like. So this next paragraph is the most intense. All the trigger warnings. Here's going to be kiss number one. Sharon, you can read it for us.
Miriam's heart rose up as the longings imprisoned in her from the day that her mother had died broke the lock of her heart and flooded her. She wanted to look at her more, sank her head into the well until she felt a mouth kissing her on the lips.
All right. This is kiss number one. What does it feel like to die from a kiss? This is Tamar's answer for us. What is this kiss? There are so many layers to what this kiss is, right? To some sense, this kiss is, there's two ways to read it, and we're going to read it both ways, right? In one sense, this is the most beautiful image, and we'll unpack all the beauty. And also, this is literally a drowning suicide, right? Like the opposite of everything that I said to you when I said, like, what's the image? And you all wrote comforting, beautiful, sweet, gentle. It's like, what's the opposite of all of those is like committing suicide by drowning yourself in a well. That's like a very violent, extreme image. And somehow Tamar is presenting us with this very, and right, she has the word drowning in there. She has this very flooded. She has this very violent image that she's presenting us with so much gentleness and beauty, right? She sank herself down and she feels a mouth kissing her lips. So I want to unpack what all the different things she's feeling are, right? The first and most basic, again, I would do this if it was a little bit easier, or we were a smaller group, I would let you generate all the answers, but I'm gonna give them to you. So you're welcome. I won't make you do the work yourself. The first thing she feels is water. right? This is a well. What she actually feels probably when she puts her mouth in is water. And I want to offer water as it's an amazing image, right? If a kiss from God feels like water on your lips, it is not far from you. Every single person on this call knows what it feels like to have a kiss from God, right? You know what it feels like to feel water on your lips. Tamar is offering that to us as one option, right? One option of what does it feel like to feel a kiss from God is to just feel water on your lips. I think it's a beautiful and a powerful image, right? Another image here she's offering us is the moon. What is she kissing when she feels a kiss? She's leaning into the moon, right? We've put so much focus on the picture of the moon there. Another image here is that what she's kissing is her mother, right? She just saw her mother, and that's what makes her double into the well. And she feels this kiss from her mother. If I was to say to you, what does a kiss from God feel like? And you would say to me, it feels like a kiss from your mother, right? That is the most loving and gentle and sweet. And then the last thing is like, whose reflection is this actually? It is actually her reflection. She's actually kissing herself. And there is, of course, some image to say like, well, what does it feel like a kiss from God? It feels like a kiss from yourself, right? This is a woman who has been so disgraced and had so much pain from her self-perception that actually achieving this kiss from herself maybe is the ultimate, like that is the kiss from God. That's the divine. It's the divine within her that she's feeling. And I just want to offer, like, if we zoom out for 1 second to say that Tamar didn't say, I'm going to write a Midrash of images of female God images, right? I'm going to give you some female God images. And then we might be like all queasy and like, I don't know how I feel about female God images. They're a little hard. Instead, she says, I'm going to write a Midrash about the death of Miriam. And through this beautiful interplay of all these images, she's now given us God as the moon, God as your mother, God as the inner woman within you, and God as water, which are each these distinct, very feminine images, you know, the moon as the monthly cycle, and also from the Midrash. So she does this amazing job of giving us this story about Miriam, and at the same time, giving us like a whole constellation of images of feminine God images. So if this is kiss number one, simultaneously like so sweet and so gentle, water on your lips, a kiss from your mother, and so violent. This is the ultimate of despair. This is a suicide. This is a drowning in this one paragraph. So holding all of those together, that's image number one of what does it mean to imagine a kiss from God from Miriam. The next image, you're just give us that one line and then we'll unpack it a little.
Her empty pitcher slipped to the ground and shattered.
This is image number two. This is actually an image that you also see throughout different Talmud stories and Midrash of like a pitcher. A pitcher is the vessel, and the broken vessel is like when your soul goes free. So it's not clear here, right? She's holding the pitcher maybe, and when she doubles into the well, the pitcher falls and breaks, but it is certainly meant to give us an image of death. There's a more well-known, I wouldn't say well-known, but like on the scale of Talmud stories, somewhat well-known story of a rabbi who is on his deathbed and he just needs to die. And this other group of rabbis are praying for him nonstop. And his nursemaid or his woman who's taking care of him throws a pitcher and it breaks and it distracts the prayers for a minute. And in that moment, his soul is able to leave. So there is a sense in an echo of that story of like a release. That's a story where the person just needed to die. They just needed permission to die. And it may be there's an image in this broken pitcher image here is the echo of a story of like, she just needed that relief and to be able to move on. That's image number two. Now we'll get image number three.
At first light, the one called the morning star, the daughters of Israel came to fill their pitchers at that same well and found it dry. They said, let's call our sister Miriam to raise the waters, since this well has been given to us in our wanderings only because of her. Okay,
so the women come, and I really do think we can read this as a critique of the women, right? They know that they have the water because of Miriam, and they don't know that Miriam has died, right? They are somehow able to discover that the water is gone before they're able to understand that Miriam has died, even though they do know that there's the connection between the two. And I think this sort of critique of them will continue. We'll read one more sentence.
They said, "Who will go into that tent?" since they were scared to.
Okay, so now Miriam is actually not even alive, right? This is no longer, we can't read the story anymore and say, well, she shouldn't have shut herself up that long, right? At this point, actually, we know it is the women, right? They are afraid. They are holding as much fear around Miriam's disease and illness as she is. They don't want to go into that tent. And I think here is when I would say, like, this is also, well, give me one more sentence and then I'll say my next thing.
Tzipora said, "I will, since after all, this disease infected her because she tried to bring my husband back to me."
Okay, so I have a lot to say about Tzipora and how she just appeared here and what's going on here. But I just want to pick up on the word disease, machala, is that that machala, my understanding is that, like, in modern Israeli society, that word, the disease, is sometimes used to refer to cancer. That instead of saying we have cancer, you just say, like, the disease. Although maybe now you would say there's new pervasive diseases, but that had been in the sort of culture. And that this is, the whole Midrash can also be read as a story of, like, what does it feel like to be a cancer survivor? And how does an experience like that change the way you interact, both in terms of the experience as a survivor and how you sometimes wind up shutting yourself off from community unnecessarily, and as a critique of community, right? As, like, why did they allow her to shut herself off? And is that something that we do when people have cancer? We get uncomfortable around them, and it's like we care about them, but we're afraid to actually go into their house because there is something too overwhelming about that, that makes us just keep our distance. And even once maybe the cancer is gone, do we actually go back into their house, or do we keep that distance? So I just sort of wanted to, like, bring in that valence as a second read here. Okay, Tzipora is the one who comes to her aid. This is a line that sent me back into the classical Midrash, and I know so much more about Miriam than I ever did before I read this Midrash, because when I first read this Midrash, I said, so who's Tzipora? Tzipora is Moses's wife. And I was raised with the narrative that Tzipora and Miriam don't get along, right? The reason why Miriam was punished is because she was bad-mouthing Tzipora. She did not like Moses' wife, and she's making Tzipora look bad. And the first time I read this, I thought, like, well, Tamar, you can't just rewrite history. Like, you do not get to blame, you do not get to say, oh, Tzipora and Miriam had this great relationship. And then I went back to the classical Midrash and I discovered, actually, that great relationship between these two women is actually found in classical Midrash. So one way to read, and actually the way that Rashi reads why Miriam was punished, is that she was actually saying to Moses, she was trying to say to Moses, like, she discovered that Moses doesn't sleep with his wife, Tzipora, anymore. And she was trying to say to Moses, go back to your wife. You need to go back to your wife. And that's actually what caused this trouble. And there are two Midrashim, classical Midrashim, that are now two of my favorite Midrashim, that tell us about their relationship. And they both start from a place of this amazing question, which is like, why would Miriam know about Tzippora's sex life? How inappropriate for these two, like, matriarch women to be talking about whether or not Tzipora is having sex with Moshe. Like, we don't want to think about Moshe's sex life. Why are they even talking about that? And in these two stories, they sort of give two different narratives of how Miriam comes to know this information. But I'll just share one of them, which is that Tzipora starts to let herself go. It says she stops wearing tachshite nashim. She stops wearing her jewelry, and that Miriam notices and says, like, what's up with you? And Tzipora says, Moses doesn't sleep with me anyway. It doesn't matter. Which I just think that classical Midrash, that's not a modern Midrash. That's actually part of a classical Midrash, is this, like, amazing image of, like, you know, we can sometimes say, like, oh, women are always policing each other. And it's to say, like, that classical Midrash offers us the most beautiful inverse of that image, which is like women who take care of each other, who say, I'm noticing something about the way that you dress has changed, and it indicates that something might be wrong, and I want to check in with you about that, which is like just this beautiful story. Maybe I'll very, very quickly tell you the other Midrash, because it's also just amazing, which is that there's other guys, Eldad and Medad, who start to prophesize in the tent. And that's like a different part of the story. Miriam and Tzipora are not in that story, but in the Midrash, they hear about it. And when they hear about it, Tzipora says to Miriam, boy, do I feel bad for their wives. And Miriam says, why do you feel bad for their wives? And Tzipora says, well, don't you know prophets don't sleep with their wives? And that's how she finds out. Which again, it's a story of them talking to each other. But the thing that I love about that Midrash is it opens up for you that literally everything that's happening in the Torah, there's like another version of like what the women are saying and thinking in the background. And you could write, in theory, you could write those Midrashim for like every other story that has no women in it. It's like, no, there were women there and they had opinions on what was going on. They were just sort of like off camera, having the side conversation that like, thank God this Midrash captured for us. So all of that could be behind this image, right? Where Tzipora is the one who comes forward. And Tamar is highlighting for us that we don't have to accept a narrative of Tzipora of like, oh, the only two women in the story had to be enemies, right? Actually, maybe there's this possibility of this supportive sisterhood, right? Where they're there for each other. And even to the end, Tzipora is the only one brave enough now to say, I'll go into her. And it's not like she's been going in until now. So it's both a praise and a critique, I think, of Tzipora's opinion. Okay, we'll go a little bit further. Tzipora goes in. You want to read for us this last kiss image?
She found her lying in her bed, draped in a gentle light, her eyes closed and her lips pursed like a baby's.
Give me one more line.
She said, we will return to you, my sister. She
Right.
exited and told them.
Great. Here's kiss number 3, right? I think this is the image that most resembles the one that you all described with your words when I said, like, how do you picture the kiss from God? She's found, how do we all want to die? We want to be lying in bed. We want to be draped in a gentle light, you know, so peaceful, so calm. And then her lips are pursed like a baby here, right? Katinoket. It's like the most gentle, the most calm. Great. So Marna is asking in the chat, wait a minute, how did she get from the well back to her bed? Which is an excellent question, right? How did she fall down a well and she's having this like very peaceful, they discovered her asleep in bed? And my answer is, I don't know, right? I don't know. I've actually never actually asked Tamar, what did she mean when she wrote this Midrash? That's why I sort of like to teach it as like, there are these 3 different images. Maybe she had that kissing experience and then she made it home and then she died there. Maybe that wasn't actually like a suicide death. Maybe the well experience is a dream or is imagined, or maybe it's like, here's sort of 3 different options of what it could have looked like. But she leaves us with this most gentle image where she is at home in bed. And again, we have like the most beautiful and the most painful, right? The most beautiful is she's found by Tzipora. And the most you know, you want to be found by your closest loved ones and family, right? And the most painful is she's only found because the well is empty, right? It's like, if the well wasn't empty, how long would have passed before they would have even noticed that Miriam is gone? That's sort of heartbreaking to think about. And so again, we have sort of the most beautiful image and the most painful image. The Hebrew here is very important. It's actually Aramaic. She says to them, Hadran alach achoti, I will return to you, my sister. The Hadran alach is Aramaic. It's from the traditional Siyum language. When you finish studying a book of, I guess I'm calling, what I'm calling kiss 2, someone asked in the chat, what's kiss number 2 is death number 2 is like the breaking of the vessel, is sort of like the second death image. So I guess there's 2 death images, but 2 kiss images maybe, but 3 death images. The Hadran alach is the formula that we say when we finish studying a book of Talmud. You say, Hadran alach, name of the book of Talmud, v'hadrachalan. I will return to you, tractate brachot, and you will return to me, tractate of blessings. And I think it's a beautiful image that she inserts here, that she says, I will return to you, my sister Miriam, could mean I will continue learning from you throughout your life, throughout the rest of my life. Like, I will keep coming back to the images of you. But Miriam happens to be a book, actually. Like, we actually also return to Miriam's story every year. This is something we really truly do, and we learn so much from her. When we don't have to say goodbye to Miriam. When she dies, we get to start the Torah over again and relive her experience and learn from her again and again. So I feel like it's an amazing ability to bring together that, like, I will return to you. And I think in particular, this is a phrase that I've carried with me when people have died, who, like, Bell Hooks died recently, and I picked up her book and started reading it again. And I felt like, Hadran alach, Bell Hooks. It's like, you wrote a book and I can come back to your book and read it and revisit it. And same with Miriam, we have this book of hers. And that's the last words that we have here. And I also think it's a tikkun, it's a fixing, it's a correction on how Tzipora was treating Miriam in her life, because she didn't return to her. She left her. And now Tzipora is able to say, actually, I need to come back. I need to be returning to you. And maybe also I should have been returning to you. All right, she leaves and she tells the women what happened. And now we're gonna have, I like to think of this as like, if you studied Midrash, that like, now the Midrash is gonna come in for a landing. And when a Midrash comes in for a landing, it lands on a verse, right? We started with a verse, we asked a bunch of questions, and we're gonna come back into a verse. And she's gonna give us two landing options, both different verses from the Song of Songs. One's going to pick up on the moon image, and one is going to pick up on the kiss image. So we'll hear those. So close us out and tell us the closing piece here.
Some say that as they were preparing her body for burial, they wailed over her. Who is she that shines like the dawn, beautiful as the moon? Song of Songs. And some say they wailed, oh, let him kiss me with the kisses of your mouth, also from Song of Songs.
All right, so that's our Midrash. I think, Shirel, you can close out the handout if people want to keep looking at it, you have it. And again, at the bottom, I gave you the moon Midrash. I didn't give a whole lot of time, right? If we had another half hour, we could probably fill it now, just talking about this Midrash and what it means and what you think of it. I'm curious, maybe you can put into the chat, but like the Midrash and also this story, how it impacts your images of Miriam, how it makes you think about Midrash differently. I think a fruitful question is always like, what makes this Israeli? What makes this a women's Midrash? What makes this a modern Midrash? What makes this an Israeli Midrash? How do we see all of those different elements come through? I don't know, Shirel, if you want to, if you've been able to pull out a question or two that you want to have me address. I don't know if there will be time necessarily, but maybe
actually it was amazing to see you address them all as they were coming on. And I think the question you just posed of what makes this an Israeli Midrash is fascinating. I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that. And also, I just went back to the fact that you did say that this is one of your favorite texts. So another thing, if you want to kind of mention.
Yeah, I think the reason why it's one of my favorite texts is because it first of all, it's beautiful. And like, you just can't read it without feeling the beauty of the image. Miriam is one of my favorite characters. I saw there was some chatter in the chat of like, who was Miriam married to? So there's two different Midrashic traditions that try to marry. The Midrash in general likes to marry off characters, right? They don't like the idea of there's this like woman floating out there. So sometimes they try to marry her off to Caleb. Sometimes they try to marry her off to Hor, is this other character. You could do a whole fascinating class on Hor and who is he. But I've always been super drawn to Miriam, in part because she is one of the only women characters who is not a wife. Like her primary role is not as wife. And that has always been fascinating to me. And the other thing I'll say is like, I have two brothers and a sister, and sister has always been like a very prime identity that I carry. And so it's super interesting also, I think, to like that Miriam she's like, you know, Sarah Imenu is our mother, but Miriam is like our sister, right? Hadran alach achoti. She's our ancient sister. You know, what does it mean to be a sister and not a mother? And then I think also because I feel like this Midrash just gave me a way into like female God imagery that felt so natural and authentic and without sort of sacrificing any of the other images, drawing on all these ancient images, that I'm just so grateful to have that and to have those images as I go through my own life and my own prayer life. And then I would say in particular this past year, when we've all been scrambling for how to make meaning out of disease, how to make meaning out of quarantine and loneliness and death. This is a story about a person who dies alone. And over the course of this pandemic, a lot of people died alone, especially at the beginning. And even though it has this violent lens, it also has so much beauty and I think holding on to the possibility that people who died alone could also have had really beautiful deaths where they weren't alone, they were with God, can be an incredible message and gift for us to take with us. And so I think that is a newer learning that I didn't have, you know, when I first read this Midrash, maybe 7 years ago, but that it has become really important to me in the past year, when in particular a year ago, when there was just, it's so hard to be comfortable with that. And I'm sure, you know, no doubt that there are people in this class right now who lost people and who know people who died, who were somewhat in quarantine, either in the moment or in the months leading up to, and it's powerful to say like, no, they were with God, and it could mean that they were with their mother and that they were with the moon and they were with all these things. So we'll leave it at that. And I would love for you to join me next week. You'll scoff when I say the next Midrash is more sad than this. How is that possible? Right. Why does Tamar cry while she teaches? She writes these gut-wrenching midrashim. But we will come together to learn about the flood, the destruction of the entire world, next week. And I hope that you'll come back for us that.
Rabbi Killip, just before I thank you for this amazing and beautiful lesson in teaching, I do want to ask, how do we get our hands on a copy of the English version of the Midrashim when they come out?
I think that I gave you, they asked me for like links to pass out. I think I gave you the link to pre-order it. It's not actually, the English is not actually published until March, I think this comes out. So you can, I think, pre-order it. It's through Brandeis University Press. But next time we come, I'll make sure to bring the link, but I think
we'll make sure to send out everything. I really want to thank you for bringing to life these stories and the characters, and really in an amazing teaching, and to invite everyone to join us next Tuesday for the second part of this series. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Sharon, for reading so beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and stay well, everyone.
Yeah, have a good day and good night from Tel Aviv.